All right, everybody, welcome to the GreenCourt Connections podcast. I'm your host, Jay Bland. And for those of you who have been following along this year, you know that GreenCourt Connections exists to connect our listeners with the folks who run courts and government agencies. And we have a special guest today, somebody that I've known for a long time and been able to work with for quite a few years, Robin Bishop, the state court clerk in Cobb County, Georgia. Robin, welcome.
Hey, how are you today? Good morning, I think. It's still morning, right?
Yeah, it's still morning. It's cold and rainy here. My kids like to watch the trash truck come by, and they were pretty disappointed this morning when it was raining and cold. But they did it anyway because they're tough.
They're tough. Well, you gotta get them ready for that. I have a great nephew that's the same way. He gets very excited when the trash truck comes, so we got him one, and that's a big thing at their house. So I totally get it. It's a rainy Atlanta morning, so everybody is late for work right now, and they're very stressed out. So we'll just try to meld into everybody's day with our little podcast time here.
I love it. Well, I appreciate you joining us, and we're going to get into some things about clerk life today, which I'm excited about. In law school, they didn't teach us anything about what clerks do, and I think they should, but we're not going to be able to change the world today from that aspect. So let's start with I imagine when you were a kid, you didn't dream of being a clerk. Maybe you did, but tell us a little bit about your professional journey and what was your dream job when you were a kid?
Well, when I was a kid, it was the 70s Wonder Woman that was out, Linda Carter. So I really wanted to be Linda Carter, right? I wanted to be Wonder Woman. And then when I got to high school, the counselors start saying, where do you want to apply to college and what do you want to be? And that got a little more real than Wonder Woman. But I thought I wanted to go into journalism. I wanted to be like an investigative reporter. I wanted to right all the wrongs in the world, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. And my undergrad was in communications because I shifted and thought I wanted to be in corporate communications. Um, but the clerk journey is not what I thought of. But somewhere in my electives, I took a legal research class, and it fascinated me. So I started looking into, what jobs could I do in the legal system with a little bit of legal research classes and a concentration in management and a communications major. What could I do? So I landed a job at the Cobb County Law Library, and I was a law librarian in 1994, right after I graduated college, and I got the bug. Um, I loved the legal research portion of it. I loved trying to help the lawyers solve a problem with a case that they had. I can't find anything on.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, I saw that in a California Reporter. Let's go to this side of the library. And everything was books, nothing was electronic. We had chiseled stone. We were shepherdizing with paper. It was a different world, but it fascinated me. I loved to watch, when things would come down in the CFR or come down from the U.S. Code from a congressional vote. I would be fascinated of how to watch it, how to see then it went down to the states and see how the states dealt with it, and then follow the money. I was always fascinated by following the allocations for bills, and I did that for a while, and then went into Superior Court Administration, and then I thought I want to go back to communications. So I went to the county has a program through Keep America Beautiful called Keep Cobb Beautiful, and I did that. Did environmental education, tree planting, sustainability. Started writing a lot of grants because we were quasi nonprofit. And then I thought, I can still write. I can still do journalism, and but it was grants. And so I went to Cobb County Economic Development um, and wrote grants for the 34 departments and the judiciary. So I kind of got to get a little bit back into some legal things and public safety, a lot of public safety grants. It was right after 9/11. So there were a lot of hazmat grants coming down, 800 megahertz communications, all of that was coming through our grants program. So I really had a wonderful insight into how all of government worked. And going back to this law library days of following the money when it came down from the federal level, it allowed me to be able to find money quickly to help Cobb County do some great things, and I loved that time. But then we had our first child, and I decided, I didn't decide. I cried every day at work when I would leave her, um, and I thought I can't do it. So I decided to stay home and not work. But a lot of my colleagues from around the state that knew I wrote grants started asking me, hey, can you write this grant for this jurisdiction? Can you write this grant for this jurisdiction? So I started a company and I did grants consulting for about 6 years. And then a good friend of mine that I had met in '94 as the law librarian who was in magistrate at the court at the time, Angie Davis, called and said, hey, did you consider being my chief deputy clerk at Cobb State Court? And I had to think about it, take it under advisement for a while, and I decided to come back to Cobb State Court under Angie Davis, who was the clerk then, who is now the clerk of the statewide business court, and did that in 2013 and loved it. Caught the legal bug again. It never really goes away, doesn't get out of your system. And I loved serving the attorneys again. I loved serving the bench. I loved serving the public. I loved that at Keep Cobb Beautiful and in the law library. So it kind of brought everything full circle. It's everything that I learned up to that point brought me to where I could be a good chief deputy.
Right.
And then in 2020, the governor appointed Angie to be the clerk of the statewide business court, and I had to decide if I was going to run in a special primary to take over that position, and I did, and so here I am. So that's how I got into, but the courts have always been a part of me, but the clerk part came back later.
Yeah. So from Wonder Woman to Clerk, there's some similarities there, and then
There are.
you mentioned Angie Davis, which also reminds me of Wonder Woman. So there's a lot of Wonder Woman in that story.
There is. See, I had to make it go through somehow. And the staff, they'll buy me little trinkets. So there's all over the office that I don't have in this podcast. There's some neat little Wonder Woman things here, um, but it's a lot of work. I think a lot of people don't realize how much work that clerks put into the system and into the county and into the way it works. We're like a unseen spoke in the wheel
Yeah.
that keeps everything turning.
Yeah. And not everybody, it's amazing how much, I've said this earlier, but it's amazing how little lawyers know about clerks and how important clerks are to their practice.
Well, and I've heard that story from the lawyers. I've met a lot over the years. Like I said, back when I was in the law library, no, there were no legal research. You could get Westlaw online, but you were charged by the minute, and it was a dial-up modem. So you could hear the,
Yeah.
and so you could hear the dial-up modem, and people didn't do a lot of electronic legal research because it was expensive. And so I met a lot of the lawyers, and when I went from that to clerk, I saw a lot of them again. Now, of course, it was rare because they were e-filing. You don't
Right,
see
right,
as much
right.
as you did back in the day when they were handing everything over the counter. But the lawyers would say, my mentor told me I needed to get to know the clerks, get to know the clerks, and get to know the clerks in the courtroom. They would always say that. Whoever trained them told them,
Yep.
get to know the clerks, get to know the courtroom clerks, get to know the clerks that docket, get to know the clerks that, entry on cases where you file in your motions. And they said their mentors told them that. So even though, Jay, they don't teach it in law school, I think they teach it to each other.
They do. They learn the hard way, and then they teach it to the new folks to not learn the hard way. So I think that makes sense. You mentioned mentor in that sentence, which brings me to the next point I want to cover. Who has been the most impactful professional mentor in your life?
Mm. Let's see. Is it okay if I don't have one?
Yes, okay. Yeah, yeah. You have many.
Well, because my jobs came full circle, all in county service, all in service to Cobb and its citizens. I think I have a mixture of executive branch and judicial branch mentors, right?
Right.
In executive branch, definitely the longest running county manager in Georgia government history was David Hankerson. And he was a great county manager and a great mentor to me. He always leaned into my strengths and very gently told me my weaknesses, and
Yeah.
I appreciated that. And he always made me feel like I could do anything, because I did a lot of different things, and he gave me the freedom to do that. And then also the county commission chair at the time that I was the grants coordinator for all the county departments was Sam Owens, who also served as Attorney General for the state, who's a practicing attorney now, and who was at Kennesaw State for a while. He very much encouraged outside of the box thinking, which allowed me to do some great things with the grants program. As far as judicial mentors, there were so many judges that I'd met along the way and attorneys that I'd met along the way, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it was Angie Davis, who was the clerk of the statewide business court, because when I came in as chief deputy in 2013, she really took a lot of time with me to refresh my court memory, because I did serve in Superior Court after the law library. I forgot about that for about a year in Superior Court admin, and she took a lot of time with me to refresh that memory, and she taught me a lot about holding the line, uh, working within a space of integrity that you create for yourself and your employees, um, really digging into what makes it right, the why, digging into making it right the first time, and being very intentional about that. That was a word she used a lot, was intentional. Taught me a lot. But we had been friends together, went through the same graduate school program and through the same county development program, but it was neat to see her in a new light as a boss.
Mhm.
And she was a great mentor to me in the realm of being clerk.
Yeah, Angie's a special one. And I've seen y'all's relationship through the years. I saw y'all work together. I saw her leave and you take over, and I saw y'all's relationship continue as y'all led your own agency. So I'm glad you brought up Angie. For those that have been listening to the podcast, she was on here earlier this year talking about the new statewide business court, which has been a huge success. So I'm glad you brought her up. Speaking about clerk responsibility in general, we've got a lot of listeners from government agencies who interact with courts but really don't understand the clerk's role. So question for you is, from a high level, would you mind just explaining kind of what does a clerk do and what matters to them?
Oh, I could spend all day on that because it's what we like. Oh, but listen, but wait, there's more. Um, so, what clerks do? Well, predominantly, and you've probably heard this from any clerk you've interviewed, is we keep the record. And so, what is the record? Well, it's everything that happens in a court case, whether it's civil or criminal. In the state of Georgia, there's 159 counties. So, set out by the Georgia Constitution, every county has a Superior Court clerk. In Georgia, there are 10 counties that are big enough that local legislation decided, hey, you can also have a state court clerk that comes with your separate state court than Superior Court. Because other than our 10 counties that have state courts, those Superior Courts in the 159 counties, a lot of the court operations are under one clerk. So in Cobb, we're a little different. We're one of the 10, so we have a state court and a Superior Court. And in our case, we keep the record for all traffic citations, misdemeanors, civil litigation that's above 15,000, but usually it's complex because a lot of our jury verdicts can be in the millions. Our civil litigation is pretty heavy. But one of the things that I like to tell when I talk to business associations and when I talk to stakeholders in the county, I say, we're an important part of economic development. And they say, what? And I say, economic development because a couple of reasons. If you own a small business, you're going to probably have a company that you use to do background checks on your employees, especially if they're going to drive a car, be in people's homes, be around children. Those background checks come in to check the clerk's record that I referenced before. So you really need people that are on top of it so that you know as a business owner that those background checks are correct. That's important to business owners, but it's also important to the economy when it comes to the defendants. If you're a defendant and something is not put on your record for a permanent placement for the next 10 years out, and you're trying to open a company or open a business or apply for a job, if your record's not correct, you won't be able to get that job. The economy won't move for you to have that employment. So we're part of employment, and we're part of keeping that record for the good for later. For background checks, we're also a part for the civil litigation, when you're going to have garnishments or if you have litigations between Titan companies and they're trying to figure out what they want done with a lawsuit, that maybe they're liable, maybe they're not, but they want to know that their court system can move that through quickly. And the clerk's office is so important when it comes to scheduling those cases. I mean, companies look at that. When they look at locations for economic development, They look at how does the court system run? How efficient is it? If we're going to have litigation against us as a company, what does that look like? How long does it take from the filing to the end of that civil case? I mean, those are things that high level litigation lawyers in corporate environments look at. So I always say, hey, we're a part. Also, if you're a small firm, let's say you're a firm that has 10 people in it, 5 attorneys, couple of paralegals, legal assistants, and let's say all you do is family law. How fast do the family law cases move, and how do I bill that, and how do I decide how that's going to help my small business in whatever city or town that you're in the 159 counties? So we keep the record, but we're that spoke in the legal wheel. And the way I like to say is sort of like in Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy goes and she tries to find the wizard. This is the old one, okay, the old one. And she pulls back the curtain and she sees the wizard is not this wizard, it's just this man sitting at this console running the whole thing. That's the clerk. You pull back the curtain of the court, the clerk is the wizard, okay? And the show goes on because the clerk is pressing the right buttons, okay? And that's how I think the other agencies should look at us, other governmental agencies. We're also moving fines and fees out. We have 16 allocated surcharges that go out to agencies that we cut checks for all sorts of operations throughout the state, and we're the fiscal agents to move that money through to all these state agencies, which totally puts down the myth that the police officers do traffic stop and speed stops just to get that money for that local jurisdiction, because 16 state agencies get it before the locals do usually. So, and the clerk disperses that money, and that's a big part of the engine that runs the whole state government. And so I think clerks don't get enough acknowledgement of how they fit into that cog and that wheel. But I will tell you this, if the clerk's office is running well, you don't even know the wheel is there, and you don't know the wizard's behind the curtain. If the clerk's office is not running well, you feel the bumps in the road and you see what's behind the curtain. So that's sort of the way I try to explain it to people that are not in government or not in the system, or maybe they don't have a lot of interaction with the court, but keeping the citizens safe from records that are incorrect is just as much of a part of what is referred to as the public safety ecosystem, for the clerk to do it. You safeguard it. We're just as much as serving the defendants and the litigants as we are the judges, the prosecutors, the bar. And I always explain it this way. It's a 6-lane highway. You have prosecutors, you have defense attorneys, you have civil litigants, you have pro se defendants, you have judges, you have the prosecution, you have circuit defender, public defender, and that center lane is the clerk. And we're driving down the highway trying to keep everybody taken care of. And it's a big juggling job to do that. But you have to love people to do it, and love all facets of that highway. You gotta love every lane and be able to take care of them, and that's really what we do.
Yeah, the economic development piece is so interesting because I haven't heard it put that way before, but you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right. When businesses are looking at where they want to conduct business, or lawyers are looking at where they want to stand up a law firm, the efficiency of that court system matters greatly in that decision. And Cobb County is a great example of, you have run a wonderful clerk's office. You took over a wonderful clerk's office and you kept it wonderful, and even improved upon some stuff, which is really helps businesses in our community. For our listeners, so they know, Robin and I live in the same community. We're both Cobb County residents, and it's important to have a court system that operates smoothly. And we all appreciate the work that you've done. As one of the residents, I appreciate the work that you've done. And I thought that was a great answer. Economic development is such an interesting way to put it. And then when you talk about, you talk to clerks, they say, got to make sure the record's right, and I got to make sure the money's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right, those are the two things, and you mentioned both of those in that answer as well.
That's important too. The fiscal responsibility is great because it's a public trust to take in fines and fees for the things that come in, and then distribute those correctly across all of those agencies that I mentioned before. And that happens when the state legislature, for the listeners that don't know how that works, the state legislature, when they change a law, whether it relates to speeding, how much your fine should be or what the threshold should be, or a criminal penalty on a misdemeanor, all of that's run through the legislature. And we have to keep the code sections that explain how much each charge should be, and then each court decides how, through a standing order process usually, how those fines and fees are assessed, and then you are the stewards of that money. Even bond, that's one of the things we've been working on, is trying to make sure people get their cash bonds back when a case is completed, because people don't really follow that legislation a lot to understand that if they're not a bonds company, that they can get back their surety money for bonding out a friend or family member, and the clerks are responsible for that. So it's a big responsibility. But yeah, the last year or two, uh, I have learned to look at it through an economic development spectrum. One of the things that we do is we work with the Second Chance Desk, which is through the Georgia Justice Project, and they do, you can seal up to 2 misdemeanors, I believe it is, um, during a specific amount of time if the prosecutor and the judge believes the time has passed and there's not a threat, to seal that for the purpose of
Right.
job hunting, employment after you've paid the debt that you need to pay to society for whatever that infraction was. And I have seen the difference that that has made for the small part we play in it, which is, the prosecutor reviews it, the attorney puts it forward, the defendant asks for it, but the clerk then has to seal the record. And then we're sealing that so that that person can look for employment. So that's what first started getting my brain going around the economic development angle. And of course, when I wrote grants, I was in the economic
Right.
development department. So I learned what corporations were looking at when they were looking at Cobb to come. And that is one of the things you look at, especially if you're going to do a large, if you are planning on locating a large business to a county, then everything has to be looked at, because the suit's usually going to be filed in the county where you move the business. So
Right.
what does that look like for your litigation, for the speed in which it goes through and the accuracy and dependability that it takes to go through that county? So I started looking at that's what I say. I really believe that although my route to being in the clerk's office and in the legal field was a little strange, I feel like every piece of the puzzle set me up to be able to enjoy the whole thing together better, because I got to um, see how each piece impacted, have a sort of a 360 view of how it impacts what we do and those we serve. Serving people in other capacities before serving people face to face in the clerk's office gave me a different perspective as well.
Amen. And it is a service, right? I mean, I know it's political by nature and it's elected and it's government, but it's absolutely a service.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, you really, you know, the love I have for people and the love I think my staff has for people is so important in what you do. Because, a cop's a big volume court. We process about 44,000 on average cases a year. That's a lot of work. Um, and when we swear in our new clerks, we always say this, we'll hold a file. I don't have one, but we'll hold a file and we'll say, this is not a file, this is a person. And
Right.
this is the most important thing going on to them, whether it's a lawsuit or it's a traffic case or what have you. It's the most important thing going on to them that day, and you treat them that way.
Right.
We say that to them when we swear them in, and say, you have to treat them that way. Um, and we always say, you may have answered that phone call or that question 7 times in the past hour, but it's the first time that they've asked it, and you give them that respect.
Right. Well said.
So you really, customer service is a huge part of it.
Yeah, it's not, it's so easy to get caught up in the paperwork and say, oh, that's a car wreck, that's a dog bite. And you're like, well, no, that someone got bit by that dog and someone got hurt in that car crash. It's not just a stack for a certain case type.
Absolutely, and that's what we try to instill in the new clerks, and give them stories and examples, and um, we always tease and say, okay, this is a stop, drop, and roll. We got to help them.
Yeah.
We have go quickly. Um, so we try to move quickly and help people as much as we can. And there's a fine line with that too, because as an attorney, this. We can't give them legal advice.
Nope.
Legally, like per the statute, we cannot give legal advice. So we have to, draw the line between what we can tell them and what we can't tell them. But we're really fortunate in Cobb, because we have a great legal aid group. We have an incredible law library, if I say so
Yeah.
myself. It's really grown. We have through legal aid, we have a lawyer in the law library now. We have great legal research for pro se's, for the public. The Cobb Bar has an excellent lawyer referral service. It's really a wonderful service that they have where lawyers sign up for their specialty and you can do it. It's a 30-minute consultation for like $40 and decide if you want to hire them, but it's in that area of expertise. So we're fortunate to have a lot of places that even though we can't give them legal advice, we have a lot of places to send the citizens to help them navigate because the court system is complex. And it's if you haven't been, we always take for granted how long we've been here and the jargon, and it's like when I listen to the police department talk in their jargon, I'm like, wait, break it down. Tell me what the acronym means. Well, we
Yeah.
do the same thing. So it's getting out of that bubble, and if you're out there enough with people and talking to them enough, you can look at it from their perspective. And they say, oh, they're not sure which court appearance we're talking about here. So um, it's just trying to stay out of that bubble and stay with the folks that you're trying to serve.
What do you think is the biggest issue that clerks are facing today in kind of a changing technology environment, changing political landscape? A lot of stuff is changing, but what are the biggest issues that y'all face as clerks?
Hmm. I don't know. Let me think. Top three, maybe. Definitely, technology is a challenge. Just because when you are working, if you're working for a law firm, you can be very agile and move very quickly when it comes to your technology resources. When you're working in a government sector, you're going through a very long bid process. You're going through research, you're building RFPs, which are all important for public transparency. You have to have transparency out there in how you're spending the public's funds, and I respect that. However, by the time you can get something implemented, you're usually two or three software upgrades behind.
Right.
I always tease and say it's like, we're operating on an iPhone 8 in an iPhone 16 environment. But that's what happens with technology in the government sector as a whole. I don't think the clerk's office is immune to that. I think that happens in IT when you're in government only because of that process. I think that's an issue. I also think that a lot of times your services and your scope grow faster than you can budget and plan, especially in government sectors. If you're on a 2-year budget cycle, you may have something that comes through a Senate bill or a House bill that changes half of your operations that you have to adjust and be able to change within the budget that's been approved. Or then you have to go back and ask for more money. I think that's an issue for clerks. And I also believe that um, there's a lot of information out there for people to look at. And there's a lot of people who have opinions about information that puts information out there that might not be helpful. That people tend to get a little bit upset sometimes that they think they've found the answer, maybe online or through a blogger or on a social media site or somewhere that information might not be correct. And so you're trying to make sure that you guide them through the system, but you don't give them the legal advice. But you can't tell them what was wrong about what they saw. Um, so I think service delivery is different because you're not just competing with, let's say, a newspaper or or the 6 o'clock news or things like that. You're competing with opinions that are stated as fact, and you're trying to guide people in the right way without giving them legal advice.
Yeah,
That's a new thing.
and that's difficult. I mean, our support team, which is kind of an extension of the clerk's office, we get a lot of calls from pro se litigants, and you want to be helpful, but the law is very clear on what you can help with and what you can't help with, and sometimes it's hard to explain that, right, and to navigate that situation of I want to be helpful, but there's certain things I just can't help you with.
And that's very hard, especially when you have a public servant's heart. I mean, especially when you teach customer service, accuracy, and efficiency to everybody that's in your office, that you can't give the answer, uh, um, the legal answer. But like I said, we are so fortunate to have a great law library. We have a great legal aid program. We have great lawyer in the law library program that we can try to help diffuse that. But it's a different environment. We have so much information around us, just as humans. I mean, not just the clerk serving people, but just as humans, we have so much access to knowledge, and you have to differentiate what is knowledge, what is fact, what is law, and what is opinion, strong opinion.
Yep,
So there's a lot to wade through there.
there is. Um, what when you think back on the last few years in the clerk's office there in Cobb County, what has been the biggest challenge you've faced, and how did you overcome that challenge?
I fear I'll give a redundant answer.
It's okay.
I fear I might give an answer that everybody probably has given if you've ever asked this question. And for us, it was being a court of record with our volume during COVID,
Mm,
trying to navigate through that. As I said earlier, we process about 44,000 cases a year. Usually, when we have criminal arraignments, we have 5 courtrooms going for just traffic and 7 going for civil and misdemeanor. And typically, those traffic courtrooms, a calendar call in the morning can be 100 positions, 120 positions per judge. So, how do you do that during COVID when you can't have that many people in
yep.
courthouse and do all that? And I think our biggest accomplishment was getting through COVID without a backlog, with that volume, working with the judges so precisely in prosecution to be able to, for the criminal cases, for the must appears, to be able to schedule those and re-notify those and get through that. It really lasted for about 2 years, but we came out of it not having to use federal or state funds.
Wow.
We came out of it without a single backlog. Um, there were some civil cases that we weren't able to get to. Some civil jury trial cases that our judges did as much as they could remotely, and we did as much as we could to support that. But some of those we had to get through because some of them required a jury, and juries couldn't get back together in the formal way for a while. But our judges were very inventive about that too. But I think professionally, that was one of the hardest times in our career. But our team rolled up our sleeves. Everybody took on things that weren't necessarily ours. When we were rotating teams, I said, I'll do mailroom and notices. So I'm folding notices, putting them on a cart, running them to the mailroom to re-notify batches of 4,000 at a time, and that's what it took. Everybody got out of their assigned job duties and went to that line that says other duties as assigned, and everybody took on that for a couple of years. It was very difficult, but I'm proud of what the team did, and even working with all the different agencies. And I mean, kudos to the public for hanging in there with us and completing their cases and working with us on changing the dates. And it was them too. It was the citizens of Cobb too. It was not just the court system. They hung in there with us, and they moved every time we moved. So it was pretty incredible, but it was difficult. It was the biggest challenge I think I've ever faced.
Yeah, and sounds like that's the biggest challenge, and then overcoming that was maybe the biggest success.
I think it was. I think we were at the right place at the right time, to be able to do that. I think our team was agile enough to do that. Kudos to them. Our bench was amenable to us saying, we have an idea.
Yeah.
Um, and then, like I said, the public, I mean, think about completing your cases during that time, as a member of the public. Because I don't know if maybe many of the, if there's other agencies that are not in the courts that are listening, there was an order from the Georgia Supreme Court, from the Chief Justice, that very specifically spelled out the safety of the courthouse. And that's because if you're in another good government agency, let's say you're going to a library, you're not compelled to go to that library. You don't have to go to that library. You're compelled to come to court. You have to come. So the safety restrictions were much heavier on the courts than they were any other county agency, because people are compelled to complete their cases. So we had the layer that was set out by the local, state, and federal. Then we had the layer set out by the Supreme Court justices that we had to check every box to make sure that we were doing. And so, but I think that was fair. I think that was fair by the Supreme Court to make it a little bit, because you had to come. You didn't have to go to some of the other places in the government.
And the Supreme Court's smart enough to understand the legal liability to the state when you require somebody to go somewhere and then they might get sick there, right? That's
Right.
if anybody understands that, it's the Supreme Court.
Yes. And so we, you know, I think we were agility. It cannot be used enough as a way to describe that time, and it was just it was a huge challenge. But and people were worried. You know, will I get a, you know, the public was worried. Will I get a bench warrant if I don't show up? I know you're moving this case, but will that mean I get a bench warrant, or will I have a fail to appear, or whatever? So there was a lot of talking through that with people just to make them feel comfortable about what was happening, and reassuring them, and sending out new notice, and working with them so that they wouldn't worry about. They Most people had enough to worry about during that time, as far as the first 6 months to 8 months when everybody was unsure. The economy got a little shaky, so we were trying to put people's minds at ease about their cases as well.
Yeah, it's a God. It seems like that time seems like it was yesterday, but it also seems like it was 10 years ago. It's hard to really identify when that was.
Yeah, it was. It seems like, but we always say that it's fresh in our minds because, but a
Yeah,
lot of good came out of it. I mean, a lot of good came out of it. We started a thing where we put a QR code. No, that was after COVID. But one of the things that COVID taught us was, addresses change so much when you're trying to notice.
right.
There's always been that issue, but one of the things we learned from that is how do you do that? Because it's a record, it's a court record. Your address that's on there is the record. The address that's in the record you can't modify without it coming through in some way or the other. So we worked with the Cobb Police Department there's a violator's copy of a uniform traffic citation that the violator gets when they get the traffic citation, whether it's a traffic arrest, traffic stop, speeding, what have you. Um, we asked that they put a QR code that takes people straight to our site. On that, there's one portion that local jurisdictions can put their information on. So we ask for our QR code to be placed on that so that if a violator receives their copy, they can go straight to the clerk's website and straight to search their case by name or by case number so that they can always keep up with their court date.
Yeah, I
So if
remember
they
that.
fail to file an address change with us, then they have a way to see when their court date is. Or we also put a form so that they could submit a PDF and e-file if they wanted to, an address change with us, to let us know, or bring it up here and file it in to change that address. So that's an important thing for all your listeners to know. If your address changed, tell the clerk, because there's no way we can notice you without the right address. But the QR code was something that came out of that challenge that we felt like was a really positive move in keeping in touch with our constituents.
But if you don't want to get picked for jury duty, wouldn't it be best for your address to be wrong?
Oh no, that's a whole different thing. That's a whole different list. That's a whole different department, whole different list. Now, some clerks, that's an interesting point too. Some clerks handle specifically and exclusively the jury duty, but in Cobb, jury administration falls through court administration. So the jury administrator is actually in court admin. It's a very smooth process because that's their sole concentration.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's usually a pleasant experience in Cobb.
Well, we'll end with this question, Robin. You've served Cobb County State Court for many years now, and when you leave that office, what do you want your legacy to be for both the people you served outside of the office and the people who served with you inside of the office?
Wow. Um, well, for the ones that serve inside the office with me, um, especially if I'm not with them, right? I want them to remember that integrity is so important. Whether it's your individual integrity or the integrity of the court or the integrity of the office, it's sort of the great name is better chosen than great riches kind of thing. the reputation of the court is so important. Um, that's huge for me. Also for them to is leave everything better than the way you found it. Even if you think it couldn't get any better, always second guess yourself and say, "Is can I do this better? What can I do to make it as it should be?" One of the things we did this year was Clerk Tank, which is like Shark Tank, where you could present an idea, and we used a Lori Greiner quote that basically said, um, "It's inevitable to to do something better, but what can you do? What's your idea?" Um, so that's a big thing. Just keep moving, keep changing, keep innovating is the legacy I'd like to leave them. But outside, the legacy I would like to leave is that people remember this clerk's office as a friendly place, as a place where they got help when they needed it, where they were treated with respect, where their case, their filing, their phone call, their transaction was treated with respect. I know in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, we seem to keep getting accolades to our employees that take the fines and fees at the counter. They want to write a letter thanking us for their experience to pay their fine. And to me, that is it. That's the legacy. I mean, if somebody wants to write us a thank you note for how our employees interacted with them when they paid a fine or fee, that is it.
Amen.
And we've had a couple of those lately. I mean, people that have had horrible, egregious things going on in their personal lives and horrible things going on that they're trying to work through and understand, that wind up thanking the employees for doing what we say. That's your job. You're only here to serve. That's our purpose. But that would be my legacy, is that people would remember, oh yeah, I remember when that clerk was there, I wrote a thank you note because they were really great about taking my $250 and I was happy about it. That's, it happens. We've had several the last few months, and that would be my legacy. I think that's what I would want to leave, and I would want the outside to feel that way about us. I think that would be great.
Well said. I've seen you do things the right way for a long time, and I believe that will be your legacy. It will be in my mind. I've watched the way you treat people internally and externally, and I've been able to work with your office and seen how great of an office it is. So I do want to thank you for your service to Cobb County, and I do want to thank you for your friendship. And lastly, I want to thank you for joining this podcast. It's been fun.
It has been fun. It's gone by really fast. I love that you're doing this. I think it's a great thing to do, and kind of get the message out about how everything works and how everything is connected together. And I've really enjoyed talking to you. Always a pleasure.